The silence on the water, the kind that makes your ears ring, was the first wrong note I noticed out here. The thrum of the helicopter blades had been a familiar sound for over 2 decades of my life offshore, a constant, vibrating reassurance of the sky above and the solid earth I'd left behind. Today, however, as I pressed my face against the small, condensation-streaked window, looking down at the immense, dark expanse of the North Sea, that comforting drone felt different. Aberdeen had vanished into a hazy smudge hours ago, leaving nothing but water stretching to every horizon. And the water itself, that was the first real clue that something was profoundly wrong. It lay unnaturally still, a vast sheet of polished obsidian reflecting the overcast sky. No white caps, no choppy, frothing waves that usually turn these flights into a gut-churning ordeal. Just a smooth, dark surface, unbroken and eerily calm. It wasn't right. The North Sea never sat that quietly. It was a restless beast, always churning, always roaring. Its stillness now felt like a held breath, a silent warning. My new assignment, the rig known as the Leviathan Drill, waited somewhere out there, a speck of metal in a world of water. Another isolation stint, another crew to learn, another few months of being surrounded by nothing but the vast, indifferent ocean. I'd done this dance countless times, packed my duffel, kissed the family goodbye, stepped into the familiar hum of the chopper. But today, a cold, creeping unease had settled deep in my bones. Maybe it was the unnatural quiet of the water below, or maybe just the regular jitters that came with starting fresh somewhere new. The pilot's voice crackled through my headset, a clipped, professional tone that sliced through the growing apprehension. "Platform dead ahead, Mr. Miller. Weather's been unusually cooperative today, should be a smooth landing." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and tried to shake off the strange, metallic taste that had appeared in my mouth during the flight. First day nerves, that's all it was. Every new rig felt alien until you found your rhythm with the crew, understood the unspoken rules, and fell into the monotonous, comforting routine. The Leviathan Drill gradually resolved into view, a colossal metal island rising from the placid water on massive, oil-slicked support columns. It was a standard setup. Towering drill rig in the center, living quarters, equipment storage, helicopter pad. I'd seen dozens just like it, indistinguishable from one another unless you knew their precise coordinates and the specific quirks of their structural hum. The pilot brought us down with a practiced, almost gentle ease, the rotors beginning their familiar wind down as I grabbed my gear bag from the small hold. 4 men waited near the landing pad as I climbed out, squinting against the remaining rotor wash. The tallest of them, a man whose build spoke of years of hard labor and a face etched with 1,000 North Sea winds, stepped forward first. He was clearly the guy in charge, distinguished by the slightly better quality of his foul-weather gear and the air of quiet authority that clung to him. "Finn Miller," he had to raise his voice over the dying thrum of the blades. "That's me, Finn O'Malley." He extended a hand, calloused and firm, a grip that promised competence. "Elias Thorne, foreman here. Welcome to the Leviathan, Finn." "Thanks, Elias. Good to be here." Elias gestured toward the other 2 men who stood a few paces back, their expressions a mix of curiosity and professional indifference. "Let me introduce you to the crew you'll be working with. This is Silas Croft." He indicated a younger man, perhaps in his early 20s, with an eager, almost boyish face. Silas offered a quick, friendly nod. "And this is Cale Svensson," Elias continued, gesturing to a burly man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to take in everything and give nothing back. Cale's nod was barely perceptible. Both seemed typical enough, the kind of lads you'd find on any rig, eager to earn their keep, but then my eyes drifted to the 4th man. He hung back near the edge of the landing pad, closer to the drop-off than was comfortable, and something about him caught my eye immediately. He was lean, almost gaunt, standing with his shoulders hunched, arms wrapped around himself like he was freezing, even though the afternoon air wasn't particularly cold. His eyes were fixed on the dark, still water below, never looking up to meet anyone's gaze. Elias' voice dropped slightly, taking on a subtle, almost apologetic tone. "And that's Georgian Havorson. Georgian's our lead engineer. Been with us about 6 months now." Georgian didn't acknowledge the introduction. He merely shifted from foot to foot, his hands trembling faintly at his sides, a constant, almost imperceptible tremor that belied the stillness of the water he stared at. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days, dark circles smudged beneath his eyes, skin pale and drawn, almost translucent. He seemed less troubled and more profoundly, intrinsically unsettled. The helicopter lifted off behind us, its rotors spooling up into a crescendo before it banked sharply and disappeared into the gray sky. Elias waved the pilot away before turning back to me, his expression hardening slightly. "Let's get you settled in, Finn. Silas, Kale, can you two handle the afternoon equipment check? Focus on the main derrick's hydraulic pressure." Elias spoke with a clipped authority, a no-nonsense tone that left no room for argument. "Sure thing, boss," Silas chirped, already heading towards the drill platform with Kale following. His movements slow and deliberate. Elias waited until they were out of earshot, then moved closer to me, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Look, Finn, I need to fill you in on something about Georgian. He's been having a rough go of it lately. Not the first time, but this stretch feels different. He's been hearing things." "Hearing things?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Rig life was tough. Isolation, the constant drone of machinery, it could get to anyone. I'd seen men crack, hallucinate, even try to swim for shore. "What kind of things?" Elias rubbed a hand over his chin, his gaze flicking to Georgian, who still stood by the railing, a statue of quiet despair. "Hard to say, not clear about it. Says it's a hum, a frequency, says it's coming from below, from the deep." Elias' eyes, usually so steady, darted to the dark water for a fleeting second, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Could be the rig's structural vibrations, could be his own head playing tricks, but it's got him spooked, bad. I watched Georgian for a moment, the man looking genuinely terrified, not just rattled or confused. This wasn't the vague anxiety that came from too much coffee and too little sleep. This was the sharp, honed terror of someone who'd seen, or heard, something that genuinely frightened them to their core. "Has he been having problems before this?" I asked, my voice low. "Not like this. Georgian's always been quiet, keeps to himself mostly. Brilliant engineer, meticulous, solid worker, but this past week, it changed something. The hum, he calls it, he's obsessed." Elias sighed, a deep, weary sound. "Figured you should know what you're walking into." The whole situation felt off, but I'd seen guys crack under the relentless pressure of rig life before. The isolation got to some people, made them see things that weren't there, or blow normal incidents out of proportion. "I'll keep an eye on him," I said, adjusting my gear bag on my shoulder. "Appreciate it, Finn. You've got experience dealing with crew issues." "Plenty," I nodded. "Usually just takes time for things to settle down." Elias nodded, but his expression stayed tense, a deep crease forming between his brows. "Hope you're right. Come on, let me show you around." Before we headed to the main building, I decided to try breaking the ice with Georgian. The guy needed to know he wasn't being avoided or treated like a problem. "Hey, Georgian." I walked over to where he stood by the railing, the faint tremors in his hands visible even from a short distance. "I'm Finn, the new guy." Georgian's head turned slightly, but he still wouldn't look at me directly. Up close, I could see his hands were shaking worse than I had first noticed, a constant, fine tremor. His breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, like he couldn't quite catch his breath. His lips moved, forming words I could barely hear. The hum, it was stronger this morning. There are patterns." His voice came out raspy, hoarse, broken up by long, agonizing pauses. Shouldn't be there. Not that deep, not communicating like that." "What kind of patterns, Georgian?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, casual, though a thread of unease was beginning to weave itself through my composure. "Shapes, under the water, too big, and the frequency. It's changing." He finally looked at me, and I saw real fear in his eyes. Not the vague anxiety that came from too much coffee and too little sleep, but the sharp, primal terror of someone who'd seen something that genuinely frightened them, something beyond explanation. They're responding to our drilling, like they know what we're doing." I tried to maintain a casual demeanor, though the hair on my arms was beginning to prickle. "Well, the ocean's full of weird stuff, Georgian. Probably just some large marine life, whales maybe, or a particularly dense school of fish. The water plays tricks on you sometimes, especially when you're tired. Reflections, light refraction, all sorts of things." "No," Georgian shook his head frantically, a tremor running through his whole body. "Not fish, not whales, something else. The hum, it's not a sound, it's a message." I was running out of ways to reassure him without sounding like I was talking down to him, or worse, completely dismissing what he was clearly experiencing. "Look, I know the water can seem creepy when you're stuck out here for weeks. I've seen some strange things myself over the years. Usually turns out to be pretty normal once you get a better look at it." "What if it's not normal?" Georgian whispered, his bloodshot eyes wide, fixed on my face. What if it's listening? He glanced towards the still, dark water below. What if it understands? I tried to grin, hoping humor might snap him out of whatever spiral he was caught in. Maybe we've got ourselves a genuine kraken down there, Georgian. That'd make for some interesting stories when we get back to shore. Georgian stared at me like I'd just suggested setting the rig on fire. The joke fell completely flat. If anything, he looked more frightened than before. Don't joke about it. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, raw with desperation. Please, Finn, don't joke about it. You don't understand, the hum. It's in everything now, the rig itself. It's vibrating at their frequency. Behind us, I heard Silas and Cale talking quietly near the equipment storage. When I looked back, both men were watching our conversation with obvious concern. Silas caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, like he was warning me off, advising me not to push the topic any further. Elias cleared his throat, his voice firm. Finn, let me get you oriented with the layout here. I followed him toward the main structure, leaving Georgian alone by the railing. The man didn't move from his spot, just stood there staring down at the water with his hands gripping the metal bar so tightly his knuckles had gone white. The strange words, the unsettling intensity in his eyes, the almost imperceptible hum that seemed to vibrate just beneath my own hearing, it all made a knot tighten in my gut. Night watch rotation starts at 8, Elias explained as we walked through the common area, his voice back to its normal, efficient cadence. You'll be paired with Cale for the first week, then we'll see how things go. Meals are at 6 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 18 o'clock, pretty standard schedule. The living quarters were exactly what I'd expected. Small but functional rooms, each with a narrow bunk, a small desk, and just enough storage space for personal items. Elias showed me to an empty room at the end of the corridor. This is yours. Nothing fancy, but it's private and the heating works. He set my gear bag down by the foot of the bunk. Any questions about the setup here? Seems straightforward enough, I replied, sitting down on the edge of the bunk and testing the mattress. Firm but not uncomfortable. How long has the crew been together, Elias? Silas and Cale have been here about 8 months. Georgian came on 2 months after them. Good group overall. Everyone knows their job. No major personality conflicts. Elias paused, his gaze drifting to the small porthole window. Through it, I could see Georgian, still standing at the railing in the exact same position. The sight made something twist in my stomach, though I couldn't put my finger on why. He'll probably feel better once he gets some rest, I offered, more to convince myself than Elias. Maybe, Elias replied, though he didn't sound convinced. Look, Finn, I'm not trying to dump problems on your first day, but keep your eyes open. Georgian's not the type to imagine things, and the way he's acting. It's got me concerned. The admission surprised me. Foremen usually downplayed crew issues, especially with new hires who might start wondering what kind of operation they'd signed up for. But Elias seemed genuinely worried, not just about Georgian's mental state, but about whatever had triggered it. You think he actually heard something unusual? I think Georgian heard something that scared him bad enough to make him question his own sanity. Whether it was actually unusual, Elias shrugged, his shoulders tightening. That's harder to say, but he's convinced, and it's not just a passing thing, he's been trying to map it. Write it down. We walked back toward the common area, passing the galley and the small recreation room where off-duty crew could watch movies or play cards. Everything looked normal, well-maintained, just like many other rigs I'd worked. But there was a weird, almost palpable tension in the air that everyone seemed to feel, a subtle vibration that wasn't from the machinery. Silas and Cale were finishing up their equipment check, running through a checklist and calling out readings to each other. They talked like guys who'd worked together for a long time. I didn't see anything strange about what they were doing, but I noticed both of them kept looking over at Georgian, who was just standing there, unmoving, a dark silhouette against the gray sky. Dinner's in about an hour, Elias said. That'll give you time to get settled in and maybe grab a quick tour of the work areas. Cale can show you around the drill platform after you've had a chance to unpack. Sounds good. Elias started to head back toward the main work area, then stopped and turned back to me. Finn, thanks for coming on board. I know the timing is a bit abrupt. We needed someone with experience and your background looked solid. Happy to be here. It was the polite response, but as I said it, I realized I wasn't entirely sure it was true. Something about this place felt wrong, though I couldn't identify what exactly was bothering me. Maybe it was just Georgian's fear rubbing off on everyone else. Fear had a way of spreading through small groups, especially when people were stuck together in isolated conditions. One person's paranoia could infect an entire crew if it wasn't handled carefully. But as I looked at the sunlight on the metal surfaces of the rig, I thought about the unusually calm water we'd flown over. The North Sea was famous for its rough conditions, especially this time of year. Seeing it so still felt somehow wrong, almost ominous. I pushed away the thought and went back to my quarters. First day jitters, that's all it was. By tomorrow, I'd have my bearings, and everything would feel normal again. The crew would settle down, Georgian would get some sleep and realize whatever he'd seen was perfectly explainable, and the routine of rig life would take over. At least that's what I told myself as I unpacked my gear and tried to ignore how nervous I'd felt since getting off the helicopter. I held on to the metal railing, leaning forward, looking at the dark water that went on forever. My coffee was cold in the morning air, but I kept the mug anyway, while my thoughts went places I didn't want them to. The ocean looked the same as yesterday, that weird stillness that didn't seem right for the North Sea. No waves, no white caps, just a smooth, black surface. I kept telling myself it was just weird weather, but standing here now, looking at that still water, it made my skin crawl. I couldn't stop thinking about the Deepwater Titan. The story had made headlines about a year ago, though most of the details disappeared so fast you'd miss them if you weren't paying attention. An entire drilling platform, gone without warning. One day it was working fine, the next day, search and rescue teams found nothing but scattered debris floating in empty water. 200 meters northwest of here, if I remembered the reports correctly. The official story kept changing. First it was a catastrophic structural failure, then an explosion, then some kind of unprecedented weather event. Government investigators swarmed the site within hours, and by the end of the week, the whole thing had been classified. No final report ever came out, no families got real answers about what happened to their people. The industry gossip was wild after that. Guys in Aberdeen pubs making up stories about cover-ups and secret military experiments. Some claimed the rig had been drilling too deep, hitting something that shouldn't have been disturbed. Others talked about strange signals picked up by nearby platforms in the days before the disappearance, radio chatter in languages that didn't match any known communication protocols. I'd laughed off most of it back then. Offshore workers loved their conspiracy theories, especially after a few drinks. Every accident became a government plot, every equipment failure turned into evidence of supernatural activity. It was just how guys dealt with the stress of working in one of the most dangerous industries in the world. But standing here now, with the same ocean that had swallowed the Deepwater Titan, those stories didn't seem quite so ridiculous. The water felt different somehow, like something massive was moving beneath the surface, just beyond where I could see. I heard footsteps behind me, slow and unsteady. I turned to see Georgian walking across the deck, and my stomach dropped when I saw him. If he looked bad yesterday, today he looked like death. His skin was grayish, and the dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises. His hands shook all the time now, not just the occasional tremor I'd noticed before. Finn, his voice came out as a rasp, barely audible over the ambient noise of the rig's machinery. "Morning, Georgian. How'd you sleep?" He let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a cough. "Sleep." "Right." He moved to the railing beside me, gripping it with white knuckles. I tried, kept hearing things. What kind of things? Vibrations, resonances coming from the water. He stared down at the black surface, and I could see his whole body trembling. Not voices exactly, more like frequencies, patterns, but not human. I set my coffee mug down on a nearby equipment crate and tried to keep my voice calm. Could have been the wind through the support struts. Makes weird noises sometimes, especially at night, or the rig shifting. No, Georgian shook his head frantically. This was different. It was coming from below, way below, and it was responding to our drilling. Like a call and response. He leaned farther over the railing, pointing down into the water. "See them, the patterns, the lights." I followed his finger, scanning the dark surface. Nothing but smooth water reflecting the gray morning sky. "I don't see anything, Georgian. They're there, moving in patterns, coordinated patterns, flashes of bioluminescence, not natural, not like anything I've ever seen." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Watch the area about 50 meters out, straight off the bow. They've been circling for hours, and the hum, it's getting louder." I focused on the spot he indicated, straining my eyes until they watered. For a moment I thought I saw something. Maybe a faint shimmer in the water's depths, or a shadow that moved differently than any current. But when I blinked and looked again, there was nothing but the impenetrable blackness. Georgian, I think you need to get some rest. Real rest. When's the last time you had a full night's sleep? You don't believe me. His shoulders sagged, and for a second I thought he might start crying. That's fine. Elias doesn't believe me either. None of you do. It's not that I don't believe you saw something, Georgian, but there are plenty of explanations for movement in the water. Large fish travel in schools, debris gets caught in underwater currents, and bioluminescence can be caused by algae blooms. No, the word came out sharp, cutting me off. I know what fish look like, I know what debris looks like. This is different. They're too big, too deliberate, too intelligent. And the light patterns, they're like a language. The way he said that last word made something cold run down my spine. There was a certainty in his voice that had nothing to do with hallucination or sleep deprivation. This was a man describing something he'd seen clear as day, something that had fundamentally changed his perception of reality. What do you mean, intelligent? Georgian turned to face me fully, and I saw desperation in his bloodshot eyes. They move like they're thinking, like they're planning something. When one group moves position, the others adjust to compensate. When they change direction, they all change together, but not at the same time. It's like they're talking to each other, communicating through resonance, and the patterns of light, those are the words, they're trying to tell us something. I wanted to argue with him, to point out how crazy that sounded, but something in his expression stopped me. This wasn't the random paranoia of someone having a breakdown. This was detailed observation, specific and consistent. How long have you been watching them? Since before dawn. I couldn't sleep, so I came out here around 4 o'clock. They were already there, just waiting, moving in slow circles around the rig, and the circles are getting tighter. The hum is getting stronger. He gestured toward the water again. And the colors, different colors now, blue, green, red. Pulsing, before I could respond, Elias' voice boomed across the deck. Georgian, Finn, break time's over. I need you both on the drill platform. I looked back toward the main structure where Elias stood with his hands on his hips, clearly impatient. When I turned back to Georgian, he was still looking down at the water with that same intense focus, as if he might fall into it at any moment. Come on, Georgian. Elias wants us back to work. Just promise me you'll keep watching Finn when you get a chance. Don't let your guard down out here. They're curious, and they're learning. I'll keep an eye out, I said, though I wasn't sure what exactly I'd promised to watch for. Georgian nodded and moved away from the railing, but he seemed like he didn't want to leave his spot. I grabbed my coffee mug and followed him toward the drill platform, but his words stuck with me as we walked. Too intelligent, too deliberate, patterns of light. A language. I tried to focus on the work Elias gave us, basic maintenance checks on the drilling equipment, adjusting sensors, checking hydraulic pressure levels. Normal rig stuff that should have kept my mind busy. But every few minutes I caught myself looking at the water below. The ocean was still, completely flat, that same weird calm that had bugged me since yesterday. But now I found myself looking for patterns in that stillness, trying to spot any movement under the surface. Georgian's talk about coordinated shapes and glowing light had put something in my head I couldn't get rid of. During a short break, I walked to the platform's edge and looked at the water more carefully. The morning sun hit the water at an angle, making it hard to see anything below the surface. If something was moving down there, you probably couldn't spot it from this high up. But as I watched, I thought I saw something. Not a clear shape or obvious movement, just a tiny, rhythmic shimmer in the water, like something massive had passed just below, making the smallest, most perfect wave that vanished almost instantly. I looked away and went back to work. That's how suggestion works. Georgian's worries were getting to me, making me see things that weren't really there. But for the rest of my shift, I kept checking. Every time I went near the edge, my eyes went to the water. Every time Elias sent me to get tools or check readings, I found reasons to walk by the railings. The ocean felt different now. Not peaceful like I first thought, but creepy. Like the quiet before a storm. The kind of silence that makes you hold your breath without knowing it, waiting for something to happen. I was checking pressure readings on the drill platform when Silas's voice cut through the morning air, sharp with panic. Finn, Elias, get over here now. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. I stopped checking the gauge and jogged toward the sound of his voice coming from the northeast support columns, where he'd been doing routine morning inspections. Elias came from the equipment bay at the same time, moving faster than I'd seen him move since I'd arrived. Silas stood at the platform's edge, holding the safety railing with both hands, his face pale, and contorted into an expression I couldn't quite figure out, somewhere between horror and disbelief. "What is it?" Elias called out as we approached. There's something down there." Silas's voice came out flat, strained, like he was forcing himself to stay calm. "Floating. Between the support struts." I reached the railing and looked down. At first, all I saw was the same dark water that had been bothering me for days. Then my eyes adjusted, and I spotted what Silas had found. A shape moved up and down in the current, caught between two of the big steel columns holding our platform above the ocean. It was definitely human, or had been. Even from this distance, I could see something was terribly wrong with the body. The limbs were at weird angles, not like broken bones, but more like they'd been stretched or distended. And there were dark patches in the water around it that looked like blood, but too viscous, too black. "Jesus," Elias leaned farther over the railing, squinting down at the corpse. "How long's it been there?" "Had to have happened overnight," Silas said, his voice barely a whisper. "I walked this section yesterday evening, and there was nothing." The three of us stood there for a moment, none of us quite willing to state the obvious. Someone had died, probably violently, and their body had ended up floating next to our rig in the middle of the North Sea. Miles from any other platform or shipping lane. Elias stood up straighter, looking grim and determined. "We need to get it up here, can't leave it floating around the supports." "Are you sure that's a good idea, Elias?" I asked. "Shouldn't we radio this in first, get the authorities involved? We'll radio after we secure the body. Can't risk it drifting away before help arrives." Elias was already moving toward the equipment storage. Silas grabbed the recovery winch. "Finn, get some tarps from the supply room." I wanted to argue, but Elias was right about one thing. If we didn't act fast, the current might carry the body away from the rig entirely. Then we'd have no way to help identify whoever it was or figure out what had happened to them. The recovery took nearly an hour. Silas operated the winch, while Elias and I guided the cable down to where the body floated. Getting the harness secured was the worst part. The corpse was in bad shape, its skin oddly slick and iridescent in the morning light, and we had to be careful not to damage it further while still maintaining enough control to lift it safely. When we finally got the body onto the platform, my first instinct was to look away. The person had been torn apart in ways that made my stomach turn. Deep, wide gouges ran across the torso and limbs, some so severe they'd cut down to bone. But the pattern of the wounds, they weren't random. They seemed to follow lines, almost like someone had carefully dissected it. And the flesh, where it hadn't been torn, seemed unnaturally distended, almost gelled. What the hell could do this? Silas crouched beside the corpse, careful not to disturb anything but close enough to examine the damage. Boat propeller maybe, or sharks. I forced myself to look more closely at the injuries. The cuts were clean, like they'd been made with something really sharp, but there were too many of them, all over the body, in patterns that didn't match any machine I knew about. And the flesh itself, it was wrong, too soft in some places, too firm in others, almost crystalline where it had been torn. "This doesn't look like propeller damage," I said, my voice hoarse. "The cuts are too precise, too deliberate. And the flesh, it's like it's been altered." Elias had moved to the radio near the platform's edge, his face grim. "Aberdeen Control, this is Leviathan Drill Platform. We have an emergency situation requiring immediate assistance." Over, static filled the speakers, a harsh, crackling and popping with interference I'd never heard before. It wasn't just noise, it had a strange, almost rhythmic quality to it, like a distorted, angry hum. Elias changed the frequency and tried again. "Aberdeen Control, Leviathan Drill Platform, emergency assistance required. Please respond." Over, more static. Thick and suffocating, it swallowed his words, turning them into garbled whispers. Elias cycled through several emergency frequencies, but every channel produced the same result. White noise so thick it drowned out any possibility of communication. "Could be atmospheric interference," Silas suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "Never seen static this bad." Elias kept trying different settings, his frustration growing with each failed attempt. "We should be getting something, even if it's just background chatter from other platforms. Something's jamming us." I was still looking at the body when something caught my eye near the platform's far edge. Georgian stood there, hunched over the railing in his usual spot, but when I called his name, he didn't answer. He just stayed still, staring down at the water like he hadn't heard anything, like he was in a trance. "Georgian," I called louder, "you need to see this." This time he turned, but when his eyes fell on the corpse, his reaction was immediate and extreme. His face went white, losing what little color it had, and he stumbled backward like he'd been physically struck. "No, no, no," the words came out as a chant, barely audible. "Not supposed to be here yet. Too soon, too much." "Georgian, it's okay." I started toward him, but he was already moving away from us. "Don't look at it. Don't touch it." Georgian backed toward the main structure, shaking his head frantically, his eyes wide and terrified, scanning the empty sky and the still water. "They're watching. They know we found it." "Who's watching, Georgian?" Elias had given up on the radio and turned his full attention to Georgian, his voice sharp with urgency. "What are you talking about?" But Georgian was already gone, going around the corner of the equipment bay. I could hear his frantic footsteps carrying through the platform's metal walkways as he got further away. Elias looked from where Georgian had been to the mutilated body on our deck, his face a mask of grim determination. "This is falling apart fast. Silas, help me get this body covered up. We'll try the radio again in an hour." We spent the rest of the day taking turns with the radio, but the static never cleared. If anything, it seemed to get worse as time passed, evolving from simple white noise into a pulsating, distorted rhythm that seemed to emanate from the very air around us. Elias put us on lockdown, shutting down all non-essential operations and limiting crew movement to essential areas only. Not that we had much choice. With the radio dead, we were basically cut off from everyone else. The body stayed on the platform, covered by a tarp, but still showing as a lump that kept reminding us of what we'd found. None of us talked much about the wounds or what might have caused them. There were some conversations you couldn't have and still expect to sleep at night. Georgian stayed away from the area entirely. I saw him a few times throughout the day, always at the far edges of the platform, always looking out at the water, but whenever any of us got close, he'd move somewhere else, like he was avoiding not just the body, but all of us. By late afternoon, Elias decided to put full emergency rules in place. All crew members had to stay in pairs, no one could work alone, and everyone had to check in with him every 2 hours. It was the kind of response you'd expect from a serious accident or equipment failure. But this felt different, more like getting ready for something none of us wanted to talk about. Evening came faster than usual, or maybe time just felt weird with everything that had happened. The platform's lights turned on automatically. Elias called for a crew meeting in the common area at 20 o'clock to discuss our situation and plan for the night. 20 o'clock came and went. Elias never showed up. Silas, Kale, and I waited for nearly an hour before we started looking for him. His quarters were empty, his personal stuff untouched. We searched every part of the platform we could get to. Workstations, storage areas, even the engine room. Nothing. When's the last time anyone saw him? Silas asked as we regrouped near the main structure, his young face pale and drawn in the harsh emergency lighting. I tried to remember. Maybe around 18 o'clock. He was checking the radio again. "I saw him after that," Kale said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken all day, his voice rough. Around 19:30, he was walking toward the platform edge near where we found the body. We went to that area immediately, our flashlights cutting through the deepening gloom. But there was no sign of Elias. The tarp-covered corpse remained exactly where we'd left it, a dark, unsettling mound. But Elias was gone. The safety railing showed no signs of damage, no indication that anything had happened there. "Could he have fallen?" Silas suggested, though his voice carried no real conviction. I walked the entire perimeter of the platform, checking every section of railing and every possible place where someone might have slipped or lost their footing. Everything looked normal, properly maintained, exactly as it should be. That's when I realized we hadn't seen Georgian in hours either. "Where's Georgian?" I asked. Silas and Kale exchanged glances. Neither of them had seen Georgian since morning, when he'd fled the scene with the body. We searched for him with the same thoroughness we'd used looking for Elias, checking every room, every storage space, every possible hiding spot on the platform. Georgian's quarters were as empty as Elias had been. His personal items sat untouched, clothes in the dresser, toiletries by the sink, even a half-finished crossword puzzle on his small desk. But Georgian himself was nowhere to be found. "This doesn't make sense," Silas said as we stood in Georgian's empty room, his voice strained with exhaustion and stress. "Two people don't just disappear from an oil rig in the middle of the ocean." Kale had moved to the small porthole window and was staring out at the dark ocean, his eyes narrowed. "Maybe they didn't disappear, maybe they left. Left, how? I asked, my voice rising in disbelief. There's no boat, no helicopter, we're in the middle of the ocean. They could have, Cale trailed off, like he'd started to say something he didn't want to finish, something too disturbing to voice aloud. They could have what? Jumped. The word just sat there between us, heavy and impossible. I wanted to argue with him, to tell him how ridiculous that sounded, but after everything that had happened, Georgian's worsening mental state, the mutilated body, the complete radio blackout, I couldn't completely brush off the possibility. We need to check the security footage, Silas said suddenly, his voice taking on a new urgency. If something happened to them, the cameras would have caught it. The platform's security system was basic but functional, a handful of cameras covering the main work areas and critical access points. Silas led us to the small monitoring station, where the feeds were recorded and stored. The system showed normal operations through most of the day. We could see ourselves working, moving around the platform, dealing with the body recovery. Elias appeared regularly on various cameras, checking equipment, trying the radio, supervising our search efforts. The last clear footage of Elias showed him walking toward the northeast edge of the platform at 1934. He walked like he knew where he was going, with a strange, almost deliberate slowness. The camera tracked him until he reached the edge of its coverage area, near where we'd found the corpse. Then the feed cut to static. A deep, rhythmic hum seemed to permeate the recording now, pulsing like an invisible heartbeat. Equipment malfunction, I suggested, though I was beginning to suspect nothing about this situation would have simple explanations. Silas fast-forwarded through the remaining footage. Every camera feed showed the same thing. Normal operations until evening, then sudden static that lasted through the night. All of them had stopped working at almost exactly the same time Elias disappeared, his image replaced by a swirling vortex of white noise that seemed to generate its own peculiar, resonant hum. "What about Georgian?" Cale asked, his eyes still fixed on the screen, his expression unreadable. "Can we see when he left?" We scrolled back through the day's recordings, looking for any sign of Georgian after his morning retreat from the scene with the body. The cameras had captured him at various points, always alone, always near the platform's edge, always staring out at the water, his hands making strange, tracing motions in the air, as if following invisible patterns. But like Elias, the footage eventually showed him walking toward an area where the cameras couldn't follow. The timestamp showed 1847. Georgian had disappeared nearly an hour before Elias. "So they're both gone," Silas said, his voice flat with exhaustion and stress. Two men vanished from a secure platform in the middle of the ocean. I stared at the static-filled monitors, trying to process what we'd discovered. The security system hadn't just malfunctioned, it had been systematically disabled, right around the time our crew members started disappearing. That suggested intent, planning, someone who knew how the equipment worked, or something. "We need to secure ourselves," I said, my voice hoarse. "Whatever's happening here, we can't assume it's over." Cale nodded, but his expression remained distant, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Silas looked around the monitoring station with obvious anxiety. "Medical bay," Silas said suddenly. "Most secure room on the platform, reinforced door, independent power supply, emergency radio." It made sense. The medical bay had been designed to serve as a safe room during emergencies, with heavy-duty locks and communication equipment that operated separately from the main systems. If we were going to make a stand somewhere, that was our best option. We gathered what supplies we could carry: food, water, basic tools, anything that might be useful if we ended up trapped for an extended period. The platform felt different now, no longer a workplace but a potential trap. Every shadow seemed deeper, every distant clang of metal more threatening. The subtle hum I'd noticed since arriving now seemed to grow in intensity, a low, throbbing presence in the air. The medical bay was exactly as Silas had described. A compact but well-equipped room with solid walls and a door that could be locked from the inside. We moved the heaviest furniture against the entrance, creating a barricade that would at least slow down anyone trying to get in. "Emergency radio's not working either," Silas reported after checking the medical bay's backup communication system. "Same static as everything else, only it's got a rhythm to it now, like it's trying to communicate." I slumped into one of the medical chairs, finally allowing the full weight of our situation to hit me. 2 crew members dead or missing, all communication cut off, security systems disabled, and the 3 of us trapped on a platform in the middle of nowhere with no way to call for help. "This has to be connected to that body," I said, rubbing my temples. Everything started going wrong after we found it. You think someone killed that person and now they're after us? Silas asked, his voice trembling slightly. I didn't have an answer. The whole situation felt too surreal, too coordinated to be random violence. But the alternative explanations were even more disturbing. Cale had been quiet throughout our barricading efforts, moving like a robot and following our lead without adding much to the conversation. Now he stood near the medical bay's small window, looking out into the dark, his fingers tapping a strange, irregular rhythm on the glass. "Cale, you okay?" I asked. He turned from the window with a strange expression on his face, his eyes distant, almost unfocused. "I found something in Georgian's room." He took out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. The paper had Georgian's precise, almost scientific handwriting all over it, but you could barely read it. It looked like he'd written it incredibly fast, almost frantically, yet with an underlying geometric precision. "He left this in his desk drawer," Cale said, handing me the note, "hidden under some blueprints." I unfolded the page and tried to make sense of what Georgian had written. Most of it was technical jargon mixed with desperate scratches that might have been words or might have been random marks. But scattered throughout the chaos were phrases I could make out: resonant frequency shift, phase transition imminent, joining the collective consciousness. The hum leads to understanding. They showed me the truth. Mixed in with the text were symbols that didn't look like any alphabet I'd ever seen. Geometric patterns and curved lines that seemed to flow into each other, creating designs that hurt to look at for too long, like they were meant to be perceived by something other than human eyes. "What does it mean?" Silas asked, reading over my shoulder, his voice thin with apprehension. "I have no idea." I studied the note more carefully, trying to find some pattern or logic in Georgian's final written words, but he wrote this recently. The ink's still fresh. Cale moved closer to examine the symbols. As his eyes focused on the strange markings, his expression grew more and more fascinated, like he was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. "These symbols," he said softly, his voice oddly calm, "they're not random. There's a pattern here, a structure, a vibrational language." I looked at the note again, but all I saw were chaotic scratches and desperate words. If there was a pattern, it was completely invisible to me. But Cale kept staring at the paper with growing intensity, and something about his expression made me really uncomfortable. It was the same look Georgian had worn when he stared out at the water, the look of someone seeing things that weren't there, or things that shouldn't be there. The low hum I'd grown accustomed to seemed to intensify, almost like it was resonating with Cale's growing fixation. I spread Georgian's note across the small medical table, smoothing out the creases as carefully as I could with shaking hands. The paper was nothing special, but the contents made my skin crawl every time I looked at them. Silas pulled his chair closer, squinting at the frantic scrawl. "Half of this is completely illegible. Look at these marks here. Are those even letters?" I ran my finger along a section where Georgian's precise handwriting turned into jagged scratches, almost like a seismograph reading. I think he was writing fast, maybe panicked. But these phrases that are clear. I pointed to a line near the middle of the page: submersion protocols, frequency alignment, transcendent integration. "What does that mean?" Silas suggested, though his voice carried no conviction. "Could be diving procedures, emergency protocols for getting people off the rig if it starts sinking." Cale shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the strange symbols. "No, not like that. It's about a change, a joining, the hum." "It's a doorway." Silas and I exchanged glances. Cale's tone had changed, taking on an analytical quality that reminded me uncomfortably of Georgian's final behavior, that same focused intensity when he'd stared down at the water, tracing invisible patterns. "They look like random scratches to me," Silas said, his voice firm, trying to inject some sanity into the rapidly deteriorating situation. Georgian was having a breakdown. None of this means anything. "No. Look." Cale grabbed a pen from the medical station and began tracing over one of the symbols on a separate piece of paper. "This one appears 6 times throughout the note, always in the same position relative to mentions of water or depth. And this one," he moved to a different symbol, sketching it with surprising speed and precision, "always appears near references to consciousness or awareness. It's a key, a vibrational key." I looked at the copied symbols, trying to see what Cale was talking about. The marks did seem to repeat, but I couldn't make out any meaningful pattern. They looked like the kind of doodles someone might make while talking on the phone, meaningless geometric shapes and curved lines. Even if there is a pattern, I said, trying to hold onto logic, that doesn't mean it makes sense. People having mental breaks often become obsessed with meaningless details. They see connections that aren't really there. Cale looked up from his copying with an expression I couldn't read, a mixture of detached curiosity and profound certainty. Maybe Georgian understood something we don't, something the hum was trying to teach him. That idea worried me more than I liked to think about. If Georgian had actually found something real before he vanished, things might be even worse than I thought. The rig groaned then, a deep metallic sound that seemed to come from somewhere far below us, echoing through the floor and up into my bones. The hum intensified, a low thrum that was almost audible now. I'm going to check the communication equipment again, Cale announced, standing abruptly, his eyes shining with a strange, unnatural light. If Elias and Georgian really sabotaged it, there might be evidence of how they did it. And if I can understand their methods, I might understand the hum's influence. Silas started to object. We agreed to stay together. Nobody works alone. I'll be in the radio room, 20 feet away. You can see the door from here if you leave the medical bay open. Cale was already moving toward our barricade. But I need to examine the equipment properly. If they disabled it deliberately, perhaps by tuning it to the hum, we might be able to fix it, or at least understand the frequency. The logic made sense, even if I didn't like the idea of splitting up. Silas helped me move enough furniture to let Cale squeeze through the doorway. Then we repositioned everything except for a small gap that would let us monitor his movements. Through the crack in our barricade, I watched Cale disappear into the radio room. The platform's emergency lighting made everything look weird and scary, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance with the pervasive hum. Every few minutes I saw Cale moving around the equipment, looking at connections and checking circuit panels, a strange, almost obsessive energy in his movements. "Find anything?" I called after he'd been working for nearly an hour. "Yeah," his voice carried back with an odd, almost breathless tone. "Yeah, Finn, I found something." Cale emerged from the radio room carrying a handful of cables and circuit boards. His expression was grim but also exhilarated as he approached our barricade. "They knew exactly what they were doing," he said, setting the components on the medical table. "Look at these cuts, clean, precise, made with the right tools. They didn't just smash equipment randomly. They systematically disabled every backup system we have, and they did it by tuning the circuits until they resonated with the hum, effectively burning them out." I looked at the cut cables. The cuts were clean, made with wire strippers or similar tools. This wasn't someone having a psychotic break. This was planned sabotage by people who knew how the communication systems worked and how to harness the strange, pervasive hum that now filled the air. "But why?" Silas asked, his voice rising in desperation. "Why would Elias and Georgian cut us off from the outside world? Why would they let themselves be changed?" "Maybe they didn't have a choice," Cale said quietly, his eyes drifting back to Georgian's note. "Maybe something compelled them to do it. The hum, it's persuasive, it's a song, a frequency that overtakes the mind." The implications really shocked me. If Elias and Georgian had been somehow compelled to isolate us, then their disappearance wasn't random. It was part of a larger plan, an orchestrated act of submission. "Made them do it how?" I asked. "Mind control, hypnosis, that's science fiction, Cale." Cale went back to studying Georgian's note, his finger tracing the strange symbols with growing interest, now with a pen in hand, sketching new connections. "I don't know, but these symbols, they're starting to make more sense. They're a sequence, a progression, a tuning." "No, they're not," Silas said firmly, his voice shaking. "They're meaningless scratches made by someone who lost his mind. Don't start going down the same path Georgian did." But Cale wasn't listening. He'd found another pen and was copying more symbols onto a fresh sheet of paper, adding details and connecting lines that I couldn't see in the original. He looked more confident now, like he was figuring out a language, a frequency he was starting to understand. The platform shook slightly. A deep, resonant tremor that vibrated through the metal floor under our feet. At first I thought it was normal. These offshore rigs always adjusted to wind and waves. But it happened again a few seconds later, with a deep groaning noise that seemed to come from somewhere far below us. This wasn't the creaking of metal under strain, it was a rhythmic, almost deliberate pulse. "What was that?" Silas moved to the small window, pressing his face against the glass to look down at the ocean. Another groan echoed through the platform, longer this time, with a metallic, almost organic quality that didn't match any normal structural stress. The sound seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves, creating harmonics that made my teeth ache. Platforms under stress, I said, trying to convince myself as much as Sila's. Storms probably coming in, weather can change fast out here. But when I checked the small weather monitor in the medical bay, the reading showed calm conditions. No wind, no big waves. Nothing in the weather that would explain why the platform was moving. The groaning came again, and this time I could swear it sounded almost on purpose, not just random metal wearing out, but like something was pushing against certain parts of the structure, pushing in a specific, rhythmic pattern, as if something was testing how strong the platform was from underneath. The hum from the static radio now seemed to pulse in time with the groans. We should take shifts, I said, the words feeling hollow in the increasingly resonant space. Someone needs to stay awake and keep watch while the others rest. Silas nodded, sitting down in one of the medical chairs, his shoulders slumped. I'll take first watch, you two try to get some sleep. Sleep seemed impossible, but I was getting really tired. I felt drained from all the stress and tension of the last 2 days. I stretched out on the medical examination bed, using folded towels as a pillow. Cale picked a spot near the table where Georgian's note was spread out. Even as he lay down, he kept staring at the symbols in a way that made me uncomfortable, tracing them in the air with his fingers. "Cale, you need to rest," I murmured, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "Staring at that thing all night won't help anything." "Just a few more minutes," he murmured, his eyes glassy. "I'm starting to see how they connect. The patterns are becoming clearer. The frequency is almost complete." I wanted to argue with him, to point out that he was following the same path that had led to Georgian's breakdown, but I was too tired to worry anymore, and I started falling asleep, even though the surroundings were uncomfortable. My dreams were weird and scary, filled with dark water, strange symbols carved into metal, and voices calling from really deep places, resonating through my very bones. I woke up many times during the night, confused about what had woken me. Each time I could see Silas's shape by the window, a vigilant silhouette, still keeping watch. And Cale bent over the table, still studying the note in the dim emergency lights, his fingers moving in an unseen rhythm. Morning didn't make me feel any better. The platform kept making noises all night, almost like a pattern, a slow, deliberate cadence that matched the hum. The emergency lights made it hard to know what time it was, but I felt like I'd barely slept at all. "Any changes?" I asked Silas as I sat up, trying to work the stiffness out of my back. "The sounds got worse around 3 o'clock, he said, his voice hoarse. "More frequent, more intense, and Cale," he gestured toward the table. I turned to look and my stomach dropped. Cale had covered the medical table with papers, dozens of sheets filled with symbols like the ones from Georgian's note. But these were bigger and fancier, with flowing lines making patterns across multiple pages, like a complex circuit diagram or an alien score. "Cale, what is this?" He looked up at me with eyes that seemed oddly distant, almost luminous in the dim light. I figured it out, the structure, the meaning. It's not a language exactly, it's more like a map, or maybe. Instructions. Instructions for what? For understanding, for accepting, the invitation. Cale's voice had taken on the same dreamy, detached quality that Georgian's had in his final conversations. "They're not random, Finn, they're a pathway. A vibrational pathway to something bigger, something older." Silas moved closer to examine the drawings, his expression a mixture of fear and bewilderment. "Cale, you've been awake all night drawing nonsense. You need to rest, eat something. Clear your head, it's not nonsense." Cale stood up, gesturing to his elaborate symbol network, his movements fluid and precise, utterly unlike the stiff, exhausted Cale I knew. "Look at the connections. The way each element builds on the last. This is communication, just not in any format we were taught to recognize. It's a resonant frequency, and I'm learning to speak it." I studied the papers more carefully, trying to see what Cale was describing. The symbols were connected by flowing lines, creating patterns that seemed to move when I stared at them too long, like a living, breathing design. But to me, they still looked like the obsessive drawings of someone losing touch with reality. The hum seemed to grow louder, filling the room, and I realized it wasn't just the static in the radio, it was coming from everywhere. "Communication with who?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper against the rising tide of unease. Cale turned back to his drawings, adding more symbols with swift, confident strokes, as if driven by an unseen force. "With them, the ones below, the ones who have been waiting. They hum." The way he said it so casually, so utterly convinced, really freaked me out. He wasn't guessing or just being scared. Kale talked like he was just stating something everyone already knew, something he now fundamentally understood. Kale, listen to me. I moved closer, trying to catch his attention, to pull him back from the precipice. You're exhibiting the same behavior Georgian showed before he disappeared. You need to step back from this. Focus on our actual situation. Our actual situation is exactly what I'm focusing on, Kale replied, adding another symbol to his growing network. We're not trapped here by accident. We were brought here, selected. For this purpose, Elias and Georgian, they understood that eventually. What others? Silas demanded, his voice cracking. Elias and Georgian, they're dead, Kale, or they went crazy and killed themselves. That's what's going to happen to us if we don't find a way off this platform. Kale finally looked up from his drawings, and his face was completely calm, serene. Dead isn't the right word. They've gone beyond physical limits, joined something bigger and more important than just being individuals. They've integrated. Like the hum, you're talking about suicide, I said bluntly, my voice flat. That's what you're describing. I'm talking about evolution, about accepting an invitation to become part of something that exists beyond our limited understanding, beyond the physical form. The hum guides us. Kale returned to his symbols, adding more details with each stroke. The pattern is almost complete. Soon, I'll understand enough to make the transition. To join them, Silas grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the table. We can't let him continue with this. He's having the same breakdown Georgian had. I know, I whispered, watching Kale with a growing sense of dread. But what can we do? We're trapped here with him, and the hum, it feels like it's getting inside my own head. Maybe we don't have to be trapped. Silas's voice dropped even lower, a desperate whisper. Maybe there's another option. What do you mean? Silas glanced toward Kale, who remained absorbed in his drawing, his lips moving soundlessly, tracing the patterns with his tongue. Then he looked back at me, his expression grim but determined. I've been thinking about what happened to Elias and Georgian. Maybe they made the smart choice. Maybe they chose to end it on their terms. You're talking about killing ourselves, I asked, the words a raw whisper in the hum-filled room. I'm talking about ending this on our terms instead of waiting for whatever took them to come for us. Look at Kale. Look how fast he's deteriorating. In another day or two, he'll be completely gone. Do we really want to wait around to see what happens next? The suggestion scared me, but I couldn't completely dismiss it either. Our situation was truly hopeless. Trapped on an isolated platform with no communication, no way to call for help, and crew members disappearing or losing their minds to an unseen influence. If something was taking us one by one, perhaps a quick death was better than whatever happened to the others. There has to be another way, I said firmly, shaking my head. Rescue teams will start looking for us eventually when we miss our next scheduled check-in. Aberdeen will send someone to investigate. When is our next check-in scheduled? Silas asked, his voice laced with despair. I tried to remember the standard communication protocols for offshore platforms. Weekly reports usually, maybe every few days for smaller crews. So we could be here for days before anyone even knows something's wrong. And when they do come looking, what makes you think they'll find anything? Whatever happened to Elias and Georgian could happen to the rescue teams too. The hum, it's a trap. The logic was depressingly sound. If some unknown force was picking off crew members, additional people would just provide more victims. And if the source of the threat was something in the water around the platform, resonance spreading through it, rescue ships might be just as vulnerable as we were. I'm not giving up, I said, my voice hardening. Not yet. There has to be an explanation for what's happening, something rational we can understand and maybe counter, like what Kale is doing, trying to communicate with whatever's down there. Maybe we can find a way to cut off the hum. Understanding the pattern, Kale said suddenly, his voice carrying clearly from across the room, oddly calm despite the building intensity of the hum. Accepting the invitation. It's the only way. He'd been listening to our conversation, but his response suggested he'd interpreted it completely differently than we'd intended. Our discussion about finding rational explanations had become validation of his symbolic interpretation. The transition is beginning, Kale continued, adding more elaborate symbols to the wall, etching them directly onto the medical bay's surface with the edge of his pen. Soon, the barriers will dissolve entirely. The hum will be all. Silas and I watched in fear as Kale covered more and more of the medical bay with his drawings. The symbols ran together, making patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when you stared at them too long, like they were actively rearranging the light itself. Kale worked faster and more confidently as time went on, like he knew exactly what he was doing, driven by an unseen intelligence. "We have to stop him," Silas whispered, his face ashen. "How?" "He's not being violent or threatening us directly, and if we try to restrain him, he might become dangerous." "He's already dangerous. Look at him. He's completely disconnected from reality. In a few more hours, he'll be just like Georgian was before he disappeared." I had to admit Silas was right. Kale was acting weirder by the day, just like Georgian did before he vanished. He was getting really into those symbols, zoning out during normal talks and acting like he was getting messages from somewhere else. Messages carried on the pervasive hum that now seemed to fill every crevice of the rig. It was exactly like watching Georgian fall apart all over again. "Understanding the pattern," Kale repeated, his voice taking on an almost singing quality, a strange, guttural resonance that seemed to vibrate in my own teeth. "Accepting the invitation." He turned from the wall to face us, and I was bothered by how calm and peaceful his expression had become. This wasn't the look of someone having a mental breakdown. This was the look of someone who believed he'd found a real truth. "Soon," he said with absolute certainty, his eyes wide and luminous. "Very soon now." I woke to the sound of rotor blades cutting through the morning air, a sudden, jarring change from the pervasive hum that had lulled me into a fitful, unsettling sleep. The noise jolted me upright from where I'd been slumped against the medical bay wall, my neck aching from sleeping in an awkward position. Silas was already at the small window, pressing his face against the glass with an expression I hadn't seen in days, pure, unadulterated hope. "Helicopter," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Finn, it's actually a helicopter." I scrambled to my feet, joints protesting after 3 days of cramped quarters and minimal rest. Through the window, I could see the aircraft approaching from the southeast, a black dot against the gray morning sky that grew larger with each passing second. "Thank God," I breathed, moving to stand beside Silas. "Finally, someone's coming for us." The helicopter got bigger as it came closer, and I could tell it was military style, not Coast Guard or a civilian rescue chopper. Something more official looking, dark and imposing. The hum in the air seemed to intensify, almost like the platform itself was reacting to the approach. The wind from the rotors started pushing the water around the platform, making ripples that broke the weird calm we'd had since this whole mess started. "They're not slowing down," Silas said, his hopeful expression starting to shift toward confusion, then disbelief. He was right. The helicopter kept coming at the same speed, not slowing down to land. Instead, it flew in low over the platform, and I could see someone in the open doorway getting ready to drop something. A waterproof package fell from the aircraft with a small parachute that opened right away. The package hit the platform deck, bounced once, and landed near the equipment housing in the middle. Then the helicopter turned sharply and flew away, its dark shape rapidly shrinking into the distance. "Wait," Silas shouted uselessly at the retreating aircraft, his voice raw with despair. "Come back, we need extraction." But the helicopter was already getting smaller in the distance, leaving us with just the dropped package and a profound, chilling dread. Whatever was happening here, a simple rescue wasn't part of the plan. We took apart enough of our barricade to squeeze through the medical bay door, then carefully walked up to the package. It was a waterproof military container, with no markings except for a small, stylized logo I didn't recognize. A geometric pattern, unsettlingly similar to one of Kale's symbols, but sharper, more defined. Inside the container, we found a single sheet of official letterhead and a smaller, sealed envelope. The letterhead had the same geometric logo, along with text showing the sender was the Institute for Cognitive Research and Containment. Silas grabbed the letter and read it out loud, his voice sounding more shocked with each sentence. "To the remaining personnel of Leviathan Drill Platform," he read, his voice trembling. "Your crew has been exposed to a cognitive hazard requiring specialized extraction protocols. Standard rescue procedures are ineffective and potentially dangerous. The following instructions must be followed precisely to ensure successful separation from the anomaly." He paused, looking at me with an expression of complete disbelief. "This is insane. Cognitive hazard. What does that even mean?" I took the letter from him and continued reading. The instructions were bizarre, beyond comprehension. First, we were to memorize a specific poem contained in the sealed envelope, a poem written in what the letter described as a linguistically neutral cognitive buffer. Second, at exactly midnight, we were to burn all written materials related to the incident, specifically mentioning Georgian's note. Finally, we were to recite the memorized poem while standing on the platform's central structure. The letter concluded with a warning that scared me cold. Failure to follow these procedures precisely will result in permanent cognitive integration with the anomaly. The window for extraction closes at 0:30 hours. No further assistance will be provided. This is elaborate nonsense, Silas said after I finished reading. Cognitive hazard, linguistic buffers, cognitive integration. It's all meaningless technical jargon designed to make us think there's some scientific explanation for what's happening here. It's a trick, a psychological operation. I wanted to agree with him, but the helicopter's behavior bothered me. A genuine rescue operation would have landed, gotten us out right away, asked questions later. Instead, someone had gone to a lot of trouble to drop off these specific instructions while staying away from the platform, as if contact was itself a risk. And the hum, it was still there, a low, throbbing presence. Maybe, I said, but someone official enough to deploy military aircraft thinks these procedures are necessary. That suggests they know something we don't. Or they're part of whatever's been happening to us. Think about it, Finn. Mysterious organization shows up with bizarre instructions right when we're most desperate. Classic manipulation technique. I opened the sealed envelope and found a single page covered with text that definitely wasn't English. The symbols looked similar to what Cale had been drawing, but arranged in structured lines, like poetry. Below the strange text was a phonetic translation that would let someone say the words without knowing what they meant. "This is the poem we're supposed to memorize," I said, showing Silas the page. He glanced at it briefly, then shook his head. "I'm not participating in this. Whatever game they're playing, whatever they want us to do, I refuse. We should focus on real solutions. Fixing the radio, signaling for actual help, finding a way off this platform ourselves. And if this is a real solution, if the Institute actually knows how to get us out of here, then they can land on the platform and extract us like normal human beings. I'm not jumping through hoops for people who won't even identify themselves properly." I studied the phonetic translation, trying to wrap my mind around the alien syllables. The words felt strange in my mouth when I attempted to pronounce them silently, like my tongue wasn't designed for these particular sounds. "Cale," I called. "Cale, come look at this." But Cale didn't answer. He stayed at his table, busy tracing patterns over his drawings, his movements growing more frantic. When I got closer, I saw his lips moving non-stop, whispering the same weird syllables from the poem perfectly. He's already speaking it, I realized. However he learned it, Cale is already fluent in whatever language this is. Silas joined me beside Cale's table, looking down at our crewmate with obvious concern. "Cale, can you hear us? Do you understand what's happening?" Cale looked up briefly, his eyes trying to see us clearly, unfocused but strangely serene. When he spoke, the words came out in a mixture of English and the strange syllables from his drawings. Integration proceeding, optimal synchronization, barriers dissolving, the hum, it is the way. Then he returned to his whispering and pattern tracing, completely disconnected from our conversation. "He's gone," Silas said flatly, his voice hollow. "Whatever process took Elias and Georgian has claimed Cale too. He's just physically present while his mind is somewhere else entirely. He's already integrated." What I saw was really disturbing. Cale was in much worse shape than Georgian had been before he disappeared, but somehow he was still physically there, even though he didn't seem aware of anything around him, only the strange, rhythmic hum that seemed to guide his every movement. I spent the rest of the day memorizing the poem, even though Silas kept telling me not to. The phonetic translation made it possible, but the words made me feel more and more uncomfortable as I practiced them. By evening, I could say the whole thing without looking at the page, but I still had no clue what any of it meant. Silas tried one last time to fix the radio, pulling apart cables and circuit boards really carefully, but it was too broken. Whoever messed it up had done a good job. By sunset, he finally gave up. "Even if I could get a signal out," he said, his voice defeated, "who would we contact? The Institute seems to be monitoring the situation. They'd probably intercept any communication anyway." As midnight approached, the platform's groaning sounds got louder, deeper. The vibrations had become rhythmic, almost musical, like the entire structure was matching some outside force, some unseen, immense rhythm from the depths. Through the medical bay window, I could see the ocean beginning to change. Dark shapes moved beneath the surface, larger and more numerous than anything Georgian had described. The water itself seemed to pulse with an internal, glowing light, creating patterns that spread outward from the platform in all directions. The glowing areas formed geometric designs that reminded me disturbingly of Kale's symbols, shifting and reforming in a mesmerizing, terrifying dance. "It's starting," I said, watching the light show intensify, the hum now a pervasive physical sensation in my chest. Whatever the Institute was warning us about, it's happening right now. Silas joined me at the window, his face pale as he watched the ocean transform. "Those patterns, they're not random, are they?" "No, they're definitely organized. Purposeful, a language written in light." I checked my watch. 23:47, 13 minutes until midnight. "You're really going to do this?" "Follow their instructions." I looked at Kale, still hunched over his symbol-covered table, his body vibrating subtly in time with the deep hum, and thought about Elias and Georgian, who had vanished without any opportunity for rescue, perhaps even without the mercy of a memory wipe. The Institute's letter might be manipulation, but it was the only external contact we'd had since the crisis began. "I don't see another choice," I admitted, my voice flat. "Kale is already lost, and we're running out of time. If there's even a chance these procedures work, I have to try." Silas was quiet for a while, looking at the glowing patterns in the water, his shoulders slumped in resignation. "If you're doing this, Finn, I'm not leaving you alone out there. I won't participate, but I'll watch. Make sure nothing else happens to you." At 23:58, I got Georgian's note and the Institute's instructions, plus a lighter from the medical bay's emergency supplies. Kale followed us like he didn't know what was happening, walking zombie-like as we headed to the platform's central structure. The ocean's glow had gotten much brighter, making a light show that beat in time with the platform's shaking. We could see the patterns clearly from up high. They formed designs that seemed to show information in a way I just couldn't understand, a profound language of light and resonance. At exactly midnight, I lit Georgian's note and watched it burn. The paper caught fire quickly, burning up Georgian's urgent words and weird symbols with bright orange flames. As the last bits turned to ash, the glowing patterns in the water suddenly changed, forming new, complex shapes, swirling and interlocking with mesmerizing speed, the hum intensifying to a deafening roar. "Finn," Silas called from the medical bay doorway where he was watching, his voice barely audible over the noise. "Something's changing, it's reacting." I started saying the poem I'd learned by heart, trying hard to get each weird syllable right, to replicate the precise frequencies. The words were strange to say out loud, alien and unsettling. Kale stood next to me, his lips matching mine as I spoke, perfectly in sync, his eyes closed in a look of profound peace. As I talked, the glowing stuff in the ocean got even brighter, rising closer to the surface, its light pulsating with the rhythm of my words. Across the platform's deck, the creaking of the structure started to sound almost like music, matching the odd words I was saying, vibrating in harmony with the growing hum. The poem turned out longer than I thought when I first learned it. Parts of it seemed to repeat and build up, creating a complex, resonant sequence. Kale kept talking with me, sounding more sure with each line, like he got something I didn't, like he was conducting an orchestra of light and sound. When we were almost done, the platform shook really hard, a violent shudder that made me think for a second the whole thing might fall into the glowing ocean. But then the shaking settled into a steady beat that matched the last words of the poem. When I stopped talking, it got super quiet. The platform stopped making noise completely. The ocean's glow started to fade, and even the wind and machine sounds seemed quieter. The pervasive hum, too, slowly receded into the background, a faint whisper now. Kale just stood there with his eyes closed, looking calm for the first time in days, a beatific smile playing on his lips. Silas was still in the medical bay doorway, looking out at the water as it got darker. "Is that it?" Silas called, his voice uncertain. "Is it over?" I didn't have an answer. The Institute's instructions hadn't specified what would happen after the recitation, only that we needed to complete the procedures by 0:30. According to my watch, we'd finished with nearly 20 minutes to spare. The ocean continued to darken as the glowing patterns faded completely, leaving us surrounded by normal black water under a starless sky. Whatever had been moving beneath the surface was no longer visible, though I couldn't tell if that meant it was gone or simply not glowing anymore. Kale opened his eyes and looked directly at me with an expression of complete clarity, of perfect understanding. "Thank you, Finn," he said in perfect, unaccented English. "The transition is complete." The hum has shown us the way. Then he walked calmly to the platform's edge, without hesitation, and stepped over the safety railing into the dark water below. The sudden darkness made me confused, as my eyes tried to adjust after the bright light show. Silas called out from the medical bay doorway, his voice strained with shock. "What happened? Where did it all go?" I couldn't answer him. I was still getting over saying that poem, and I wasn't sure what I'd just seen. After everything went from weird lights to normal darkness, had our ritual worked? Were we safe now? The Institute never told us what would happen after midnight, just that we needed to finish everything on time. Cale was gone. He'd calmly said the transition was complete, then walked straight to the edge and stepped over the railing. I heard a splash when he hit the water, but now that all the glowing patterns were gone, I couldn't see anything down there. The ocean was just dark again, hiding whatever was below. The platform stopped making those mechanical noises completely. Now there was just silence, except for the regular buzz of electrical systems and waves hitting the supports. After days of weird supernatural stuff, hearing normal sounds again felt strange, almost unnerving. A new sound broke the quiet, helicopter blades coming from the southeast. It was much closer than the last one, and getting louder every second. "Another helicopter," Silas called, moving to get a better view through the medical bay window. "This one's coming in fast." I could see the aircraft's lights now, red and white dots coming toward the platform. Unlike the helicopter that dropped off the Institute's instructions earlier, this one was clearly about to land. The pilot was moving lower and slowing down. The helicopter came in over the platform's edge, and I could see what it looked like in its searchlight beam. It was a military transport, bigger than the last one, with an open cargo door showing several people in bulky, protective suits. The wind from the spinning blades was so strong I had to grab the nearest pole to keep my balance. Instead of landing on the helicopter pad, the aircraft stayed right above where I stood on the platform. Thick ropes fell from the cargo door, and 4 people slid down them right away. They had on full hazmat suits with sealed helmets and carried equipment I'd never seen before, sleek and metallic. "Step away from the structure," one of them shouted through an external speaker on his helmet, his voice distorted and tinny. "Move to the designated extraction point." I backed away from the main equipment area, putting my hands up to show I wasn't fighting back. These people moved like soldiers, and their gear made it look like they thought the platform was seriously contaminated by something dangerous. Silas came out of the medical bay, his hands up too. "We're the survivors. We need medical evacuation." "Affirmative. Extraction protocol is in effect." The lead figure approached Silas with what looked like an injector device. "This is a precautionary sedative. You'll be unconscious during transport." "Wait," I said, moving toward them. "We need to talk about what happened here. There were 5 crew members originally, Elias, Georgian, Cale, Silas, and me, and the injector hit my neck before I could finish the sentence. Whatever they'd given me worked fast. I felt drowsy and my muscles went limp right away. My vision got blurry and I had trouble staying on my feet." "Standard procedure," the hazmat-suited figure explained as I began to sag, his voice devoid of emotion. "Cognitive contamination requires controlled extraction protocols." Silas received his injection a moment later, though he tried to ask questions even as the sedative took effect. "The missing crew. Need to search the platform, radio sabotage." But the extraction team wasn't interested in our reports. They worked with mechanical efficiency, securing us to transport gurneys that had been lowered from the helicopter. Within minutes, we were being lifted back up to the aircraft's cargo hold. I drifted in and out of consciousness during the ascent, catching fragments of radio communications between the extraction team and their base. The voices sounded clinical and detached, discussing us like we were contaminated materials rather than rescued personnel. "Containment secured. Subjects sedated for transport. Estimated arrival at Facility C in 30 minutes. Copy that. Medical team standing by for decontamination. Memory suppression protocols ready for implementation. Platform shows no remaining anomalous activity. Recommend standard cleanup procedures." The helicopter turned sharply as we got high enough, and I looked at Leviathan drill platform one last time through a small window. It looked totally normal now, just sitting there in the dark water. No glowing patterns, no strange hum, nothing weird like what we saw before. Lying on this medical stretcher made me wonder if it had even happened at all. The drugs made me more sleepy as we flew, and everything became hazy bits and pieces. The noise from the helicopter, people talking quietly, the metallic smell of cleaning stuff and stale air in the sealed cargo area. When I woke up for a bit, we were landing at a bright facility that wasn't Aberdeen Airport. The landing pad had plain buildings around it that looked like a research place. Bright, cold lights were everywhere, making the whole place look sterile and official. Medical staff met us when we landed, moving Silas and me to wheeled stretchers to take us into the main building. I tried to ask where we were going, but my words came out all mumbled. The drugs kept me just awake enough to see things, but too out of it to talk properly. They split us up as soon as we got inside. Silas went down one hallway, and I lost sight of him as they wheeled me into what looked like an exam room. The room had no windows and was super clean, with weird monitoring equipment and cameras on the ceiling watching us. A doctor wearing scrubs came to my stretcher, looking at a tablet while checking me over. Subject shows expected symptoms of cognitive contamination. Blood work will confirm exposure levels. Begin standard decontamination sequence. What kind of contamination? I managed to ask, though the words came out barely above a whisper. The doctor ignored my question, nodding to a nurse who approached with another injector. Subject is maintaining verbal responses, increased sedation for blood draw procedures. The second injection hit my arm, and this time the sedative was stronger. My vision tunneled, and staying conscious became nearly impossible. I heard the medical team discussing test procedures and treatment protocols, but the words seemed to come from very far away, echoing like a fading hum. When I woke up, I was in a different room entirely, a hospital-style bed in what looked like a psychiatric facility. My arms were connected to multiple IV lines, and monitoring equipment beeped steadily beside the bed. A small window showed daylight, but the view was of another building rather than the outside world. A different doctor sat beside the bed, making notes on a clipboard. He looked up when he noticed I was awake, giving me a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning, Mr. O'Malley. I'm Dr. Harrison. You've been unconscious for approximately 18 hours while we conducted necessary medical procedures. How are you feeling?" My mouth felt dry, and my thoughts seemed sluggish and disconnected. "Where am I? What happened to Silas and Kale and Elias and Georgian? You're at a specialized medical facility outside Aberdeen. You've been through a significant traumatic experience, and we're here to help you recover." Dr. Harrison consulted his clipboard. "Your blood tests show evidence of severe psychological stress and possible exposure to hallucinogenic compounds. This explains the vivid episodes you experienced on the platform. Hallucinogenic compounds, that's not what happened. We were isolated on the rig for days. Our crew members disappeared one by one, and there was something in the water. A hum, patterns of light. Finn, I need you to listen carefully." Dr. Harrison's voice took on a patient but firm tone, utterly devoid of warmth. "According to our investigation, you were alone on Leviathan drill platform for nearly 3 weeks. The isolation and stress caused you to experience severe psychological symptoms, including hallucinations and paranoid delusions." The words really hurt. "That's not true. Elias was our foreman. Georgian spotted something in the water. Silas helped me search for them when they disappeared. Kale was drawing symbols all over the medical bay. There's no record of those individuals being assigned to Leviathan drill platform during your deployment period, Finn. Our psychiatric evaluation suggests you created these identities to cope with the isolation." Dr. Harrison made more notes on his clipboard, his pen scratching rhythmically across the paper. "This is actually quite common in cases of extreme social deprivation." I tried to sit up, but the IV lines and monitoring equipment limited my movement. Check the crew manifests, check the employment records. Those men were real people, not hallucinations. "Finn, we've conducted a thorough investigation. The employment records show you were the only person assigned to that platform during the relevant time period. Your supervisor confirms this was a special assignment requiring extended solo monitoring of automated systems." The certainty in his voice made me question my own memories for the first time since the ordeal began. The sedatives and whatever other medications they'd given me were making it difficult to think clearly. But I knew with absolute certainty that Elias, Georgian, Silas, and Kale had been real people. What about the helicopter that dropped off the Institute's instructions? What about the extraction team in hazmat suits? Dr. Harrison looked at another page on his clipboard. "You were picked up by a regular Coast Guard medical helicopter after you turned on the platform's emergency beacon. No hazmat suits, no special instructions, just a normal medical evacuation because of your worsening mental state. None of this matched my memories, but the medications were making it harder to remember specific details. The more I tried to focus on what had actually happened, the more I forgot things. Over the following days, the medical staff did lots of psychological evaluations, asking detailed questions about my time on the platform and recording my answers. Each session left me more confused about what had actually happened. The doctors used medical terms like reality distortion and trauma-induced psychosis, saying my experiences were just symptoms of a mental breakdown instead of real events. They gave me medications to help with anxiety and sleep, but the drugs seemed to mess with my memory too. Details about Elias and the others got more and more unclear. When I tried to remember specific conversations or events, they didn't seem real anymore. This is a normal part of recovery, Finn, Dr. Harrison explained during one of our sessions. As your brain processes the trauma in a healthier way, the defensive fantasies will naturally dissolve. You'll remember the isolation and stress, but without the elaborate hallucinations your mind created to cope. They weren't hallucinations, I insisted, though the words carried less conviction than before. I can still remember Georgian's note, the symbols Cale was drawing, the hum, those details were too specific to be imaginary. The human brain is remarkably creative under extreme stress. It can generate incredibly detailed false memories that feel completely real to the person experiencing them. Dr. Harrison murmured, making more notes, his pen scratching constantly across the paper. Your case is actually quite fascinating from a clinical perspective. The consistency and complexity of your created personalities suggest an exceptional level of psychological resilience. But as the days passed, I found myself questioning things I'd been certain about just hours earlier. Had Elias really been that authoritative? Had Georgian's handwriting actually been as frantic as I remembered, yet so precise? The more the doctors asked me to describe specific details, the more those details seemed to blur and change in my memory. When I mentioned the strange syllables from Georgian's note and the Institute's poem, Dr. Harrison showed particular interest. Can you reproduce any of these sounds, even approximately? I tried to recite the alien words I'd memorized so carefully, the specific frequencies. But they wouldn't come. The syllables that once felt meaningful in my mouth now seemed completely gone from my memory. When I attempted to pronounce them, only meaningless, garbled sounds emerged. Fascinating, Dr. Harrison murmured, making extensive notes. The brain's ability to create and then eliminate detailed false memories is really quite remarkable. I'm not making this up, I said, though even I could hear the uncertainty creeping into my voice. Something real happened on that platform, something that required specialized extraction procedures. Finn, I want you to consider the possibility that your mind created these elaborate scenarios to protect you from a much simpler but equally traumatic reality. 3 weeks of complete isolation on an offshore platform would be psychologically devastating for anyone. Your brain may have populated that environment with imaginary companions to prevent a complete mental breakdown. The explanation made a horrible kind of sense, especially with the medications making it so hard to think clearly. But some part of me still didn't buy the idea that Elias, Georgian, Silas, and Cale had been made up in my head. They'd been too real, too different from each other to be just figures I'd created in my mind. What about my physical condition when they found me? Was I injured, malnourished, dehydrated? You were suffering from severe exhaustion and malnutrition, consistent with someone who'd been struggling to maintain basic self-care during a psychological crisis. But no injuries that couldn't be explained by normal platform hazards. Each conversation left me more confused about what happened to me. The medical staff seemed really worried about me, but they kept saying my memories weren't true, which felt like they were just putting more pressure on me. The medications made it harder to tell what I actually experienced from what might just be hallucinations from all the stress. When I asked to speak with Silas to confirm that he'd seen the same things I did, Dr. Harrison looked really confused. Finn, there was no one named Silas on the platform with you. We've been through this several times. You were alone for the entire 3-week period. Then who was extracted with me? There were 2 other gurneys in the helicopter. You were the only patient transported. I think you may be conflating memories from different sources, perhaps films or books you've read about rescue operations. The certainty in his voice, combined with the lingering effects of the medications, made me question my own perceptions more seriously. If the medical staff had no record of Sela's or Kale being extracted, maybe they really had been products of my isolated mind. But when I asked to see the extraction helicopter's flight records or speak with the Coast Guard personnel who'd rescued me, Dr. Harrison brushed off my questions with explanations about patient confidentiality and investigation rules. Right now, Finn, your focus should be on recovery, not on reconstructing traumatic memories. The more you try to analyze these experiences, the more distressing they'll become. He changed my medication doses again, and after that, asking questions became much more difficult. The drugs made me feel out of it and willing to go along with things, more interested in watching TV or sleeping than trying to figure out uncomfortable stuff. Days ran together while I had medical checkups and medication changes. I stopped asking about Sela's and Kale, stopped saying that Elias and Georgian had been real people. The doctor seemed happy with how I was doing, saying that my delusional fixations were getting less as my brain dealt with the trauma better. But sometimes, late at night, when the medication wore off a little, I still remembered things that felt too specific and detailed to be made up. Georgian's scared face when he talked about shapes in the water and the hum, the sound of Kale whispering weird syllables as he drew symbols in the air, the clean, precise cuts in the radio cables that had cut us off from the outside world, and the chilling realization that the hum itself seemed to be a constant, faint presence, always just at the edge of my hearing. When I told Dr. Harrison about these memories that wouldn't go away, he upped my medication doses until I stopped bringing them up completely. I signed my name on the discharge papers for the last time. Dr. Harrison looked at me from across his desk with his usual professional smile as he told me about all the money that had been put in my bank account. Offshore work carries inherent psychological risks, he said, sliding the check stub across the polished surface. The company recognizes your traumatic experience and wants to ensure your transition back to civilian life goes smoothly. £28,000, more than I'd make in a full year on the rigs. The amount seemed designed to discourage questions rather than provide simple compensation. I folded the papers and tucked them into my jacket, noticing that the medical facility's letterhead had no identifying information beyond a generic Aberdeen medical complex. My memory still feels foggy about certain details, I said, making one final attempt to get real answers. The timeline doesn't seem right. 3 weeks alone doesn't match what I remember. Dr. Harrison looked at his clipboard. Memory distortion is completely normal after psychological trauma. Your brain is protecting itself by suppressing the most disturbing elements of the experience. Fighting those natural defenses will only slow your recovery. He handed me a bottle of prescription medication. The label listed my name and a drug I'd never heard of. Continue these for at least 6 months. If you experience any recurring symptoms, vivid dreams, memory gaps, or intrusive thoughts, contact our office immediately. The van ride back to Aberdeen took 40 minutes, through countryside I didn't recognize. The driver stayed quiet when I tried to talk to him, following roads that seemed to loop unnecessarily before finally reaching the familiar streets near the harbor I knew. When we pulled up outside my apartment building, he simply nodded and waited for me to get my bag. My flat looked exactly as I'd left it, though I couldn't remember when that was. Mail was piled on the kitchen counter. Bills, advertisements, and a few letters from friends who'd apparently been told I was recovering from a work-related accident. The dates on the postmark suggested I'd been gone for nearly a month, not the 2 weeks Dr. Harrison had mentioned. I spent the afternoon going through my stuff, looking for anything that might bring back clearer memories of what had actually happened. My work logs showed normal entries up until March 15th, then nothing. The entry for that day mentioned being assigned to Leviathan drill platform for routine maintenance, but I couldn't connect it to any real memory. In my desk drawer, I found a small notebook I didn't remember keeping. The pages had notes about offshore assignments, weather conditions, and crew rotations, all written in my handwriting, but covering time periods that didn't match my employment records. One entry mentioned Elias worried about equipment failures, and another noted Georgian acting strange after morning shift, obsessed with the hum. But reading these felt like finding someone else's diary. The medication made it hard to focus, but certain images would pop up randomly throughout the day. Bits of dark water, the sound of metal groaning under pressure, and sometimes the memory of voices speaking in syllables that hurt to think about, almost like a faint echo of Kale's final recitation. When these memories came, they disappear before I could really look at them, leaving only a feeling of unfinished business. A faint, persistent hum in the back of my mind sleep brought more lasting visions. Glowing patterns spreading across black water, shapes that seemed to pulse on their own, growing and shrinking in rhythmic dance. Sometimes I'd hear voices calling from deep below, not quite human but somehow known to me, resonating with that deep, pervasive hum I'd started to notice even when awake. I'd wake with the taste of salt water in my mouth and feeling sure that someone had been trying to tell me something important. By the third week back in Aberdeen, being alone was getting really hard. I found myself walking to the harbor each morning, staring out at the North Sea and feeling like I'd left something important out there. The medical center had given me contact information for counseling services, but sitting in therapy sessions, talking about my adjustment challenges, felt useless when the therapist kept treating my memories as stress-induced fantasies. I called my supervisor at Pro North instead. "Dave, good to hear from you, mate. How are you feeling?" Jim's voice carried genuine concern, mixed with obvious relief. "We were told you needed extended medical leave after that rough assignment." "I'm ready to get back to work, Jim. The doctors say staying active will help with my recovery." A pause. "Are you sure?" "I mean, after what you went through out there, maybe you should take more time." "What I went through out there?" The way he said it made me think Jim knew more about my experience than the medical reports showed, but when I asked for details, he got all dodgy. "Company policy is to let medical professionals handle those discussions, Finn. All I know is you had a difficult time on solo assignment and needed specialized treatment." Solo assignment. The term bugged me, though I couldn't explain why. Something about it just felt wrong. "I need to work, Jim. Sitting around thinking about it isn't helping." He scheduled me for a physical and psychological evaluation the following week. The company doctor spent less than an hour looking at my medical records and cleared me for light-duty assignments. The psychological evaluation was more thorough, but focused entirely on my ability to handle isolation and stress, rather than looking at the details of my previous experience. "Any recurring dreams or intrusive thoughts?" the evaluator asked. I'd learned to be careful with these questions. "Some anxiety about returning to work, normal recovery symptoms." "Good. The medical center indicated you've responded well to treatment. We'll start you on day shift rotations. Nothing too challenging." 2 weeks later, I was back on a helicopter heading out to sea. The known routine of safety checks and equipment loading felt reassuring, though I noticed other workers giving me subtle distance. Word travels fast in the offshore community, and apparently my breakdown had become common knowledge. The rig assignment was straightforward maintenance work on a platform 40 kilometers northeast of Aberdeen. Smaller crew, shorter rotation, none of the isolation factors that had supposedly triggered my previous problems. The work was routine enough that I could perform most tasks automatically, while my mind wandered to more troubling concerns. My coworkers were professional, but avoided any discussion of my recent absence. When someone mentioned the Leviathan drill platform during lunch conversation, the topic shifted immediately after glances in my direction. Later, I asked one of the veteran workers about Leviathan drill's current status. "Leviathan drill," he looked genuinely confused. "Haven't heard that designation in years. Most of the platforms in that sector were decommissioned back in '9. But I was working there just 2 months ago. Maybe you're thinking of Leviathan Point or Drill Ridge. Those are both active in the northern fields." I checked the company databases when I got back to shore, looking for any info about Leviathan drill platform. The record showed a place with that name had been shut down and taken away in 2009, with nothing running in that area since then. But my work record showed I had a March assignment to that exact location. When I told Jim about this mix-up, he looked just as confused as me. Must be a clerical error. These databases get messed up sometimes, especially with old records. I'll have someone fix that. But the fix never showed up. Every time I looked, my work history still had the same impossible assignment to a platform that hadn't been around for over 10 years. The medication was supposed to help me sleep, but instead it made me feel weird and disconnected from my daily life. I'd find myself on street corners not remembering how I got there, or sitting in restaurants with half-eaten meals I couldn't recall ordering. One evening, I found my apartment keys in the fridge and a bag of groceries on my desk. My coworkers started noticing how distracted I was during shifts. I'd start talking and forget what I was saying halfway through, or just stand frozen for minutes while looking at equipment I was supposed to be checking. My supervisor brought it up during my monthly review, suggesting I should probably get some extra counseling. "You're competent enough, Finn, but you seem elsewhere, like your mind is processing something you can't quite grasp." The observation was more accurate than he realized. Every day I felt like I was trying to remember something important that kept slipping away from my mind. Names, faces, and conversations that seemed important would fade away whenever I tried to think about them. Replaced by a dull, persistent hum, I started keeping a pocket notebook to track what I did and thought each day, hoping to spot patterns in the blank spots in my memory. Every night I'd write down what I remembered from the day, places I went, people I talked to, and anything important that happened or how I felt. This helped me connect the dots between what I could remember and all those hours I couldn't explain. After 2 weeks of writing everything down, I found something that really freaked me out. Throughout my daily notes were other entries in my own handwriting about things I had zero memory of doing. Walked to harbor at 3 o'clock. Watched the water for 2 hours, nothing visible tonight, the hum was strong. Called Aberdeen Medical, hung up when Dr. Harrison answered. Researched offshore disappearances online. Found 17 cases similar to mine since 2008, all in areas with unusual seismic activity, and a faint, reported hum. The entries were detailed and specific, but reading them felt like discovering someone else's private thoughts. According to my handwriting, I'd been conducting extensive research into missing offshore workers, government cover-ups, and something called cognitive anomalies in isolated populations, linked to low-frequency resonance. Most disturbing was the final entry I found, written in careful block letters across an entire page. "They know I'm remembering. The medication isn't working anymore. ELIAS, JORGEN, SILAS, and KAEL were real. The Institute is monitoring MY recovery. I need to stop writing before they notice." Below this was a bunch of weird symbols that hurt to look at straight on, arranged in patterns that seemed to change position when I looked at them from the corner of my eye. My handwriting, my notebook, my pen, but no memory of creating any of it. I closed the notebook and put it in my desk drawer next to the prescription bottle I'd been taking regularly for 3 months. The white pills made noise as I shook the container, and for the first time since I got out, I wondered whether my recovery was going according to my doctor's plan or someone else's. That night I dreamed of voices calling from deep water, speaking names I almost knew, resonating with a hum that now felt like it was coming from inside me. I found the envelope slipped under my apartment door when I returned from a 2-week rotation on the Kestrel platform. Plain white paper, no return address. My name written in block letters that looked like they'd been traced rather than written naturally. The letter inside bore the same geometric logo I'd seen months earlier, though I couldn't quite place where. 6 months had passed since my discharge from the Aberdeen Medical Complex. 6 months of routine offshore assignments, carefully monitored psychological evaluations, and persistent gaps in my memory that seemed to grow larger rather than smaller with time. The notebook I'd been keeping had become my only reliable record of daily events. Though I'd stopped checking it after discovering those entries, I couldn't remember writing. My apartment felt different these days, not physically changed, but somehow less known to me, as if I'd been living in someone else's space. I'd catch myself opening drawers and cabinets like I expected to find items that weren't there, or standing in rooms trying to remember why I'd walked in. The medication was supposed to help with these symptoms, but Dr. Harrison had been gradually reducing my dosage during monthly check-ins. The letter sat on my kitchen table while I made coffee, the morning routine I'd established to anchor myself in something concrete and measurable. 2 cups of water, 3 spoonfuls of ground coffee, 4 minutes brewing time. Simple actions I could complete without thinking, leaving my mind free to process more difficult information that resonated with the hum that was growing stronger each day. When I finally opened the envelope, the message was typed on the same official letterhead I remembered from the extraction instructions. Brief, clinical, and devastating in its implications. "Mr. O'Malley," it began. "Our monitoring indicates you have been attempting to reconstruct memories that were altered for your psychological protection. Such efforts are counterproductive to your rehabilitation and may result in permanent cognitive damage. Your persistent efforts to reconnect with the suppressed frequencies are noted." I had to read the words twice before I really got what they meant. Monitoring, they'd been watching me, keeping tabs on how I was trying to figure out what actually happened on Leviathan drill platform. My weird dreams, the notebook stuff I didn't remember writing, feeling like I was missing something important, they'd been taking notes on all of it. People I'd never even met. The letter went on in that cold medical way that reminded me of how Dr. Harrison talked. Your condition happened because you were exposed to a cognitive anomaly that exists outside normal reality. Regular psychiatric treatment didn't work, so we had to alter your memories to keep you from completely breaking down. The hum you perceive is a residual resonance. It is not an illusion. Cognitive anomaly. The way they said it made it sound like something real you could measure, not just the hallucinations and stress the medical staff had told me about. Whatever I ran into on that platform was serious enough that some organization with more power and resources than normal hospitals had to step in. Your memories were modified to preserve essential psychological functions while removing information too dangerous for conscious processing. This treatment has allowed you to maintain employment and social relationships that would otherwise be impossible. I set the letter down and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at Aberdeen Harbor, where supply boats went back and forth between shore and offshore platforms. The same routine I'd watched for years, yet it felt like watching someone else's life on TV. How much of my current life was my own choice, and how much was careful psychological management? The letter explained that my return to offshore work wasn't just random recovery, but planned therapy. Controlled exposure to maritime environments helps reinforce the changed memory structure while preventing you from going back to your original traumatic state. Your supervisors know about your condition and have been told to watch how you adjust. Jim's careful attention to my assignments, the way coworkers kept their distance, the evaluations that focused on my ability to handle being alone, all of it had been set up by people who knew exactly what had happened to me and what ongoing treatment I needed. But the final paragraph contained information that made me shake. While your memories have been successfully modified for your protection, we want you to understand that your former colleagues retain complete awareness of their current state and the events that led to their transition. Elias Thorne, Georgian Havorson, Silas Croft, and Cale Svensson remain conscious and cognizant, though existing in a form beyond conventional human experience. The resonance they now perceive is unfiltered. The names shocked me. Elias, Georgian, Silas, Cale. I could almost remember their faces, their voices, how they acted during those final days on the platform. They weren't just made-up people, they were real. And they had gone through something awful with me before being taken by whatever I'd been protected from remembering. They were still aware, still conscious, still experiencing whatever happened to them, while I'd been rescued and given the mercy of changed memories. It wasn't fair that I'd been saved, while they'd been left to deal with the full consequences of our run-in with something beyond normal reality. The hum seemed to grow louder, filling my head, a deep, resonant echo of their continued, conscious existence within the anomaly. The letter concluded with specific instructions. Burn this communication immediately after reading. Continue your prescribed medication schedule and offshore work assignments. Do not attempt to research your colleagues or investigate your suppressed memories. Such actions will trigger protective protocols that may require more invasive treatment, as your mind is already showing signs of reattunement. I read the entire message once more, memorizing details that would probably fade within hours or days as my modified memory systems worked to suppress information they'd been programmed to reject. Then I took the letter to my kitchen sink and held a lighter to its corner, watching the paper burn as the flame ate away words too dangerous for me to keep. The ashes went down the drain, leaving no physical evidence of the message I'd received. The truth was still in my head, for now at least. The Institute existed. My memories had been deliberately changed. Elias, Georgian, Silas, and Cale were real people who'd suffered fates I couldn't fully understand, while I'd been given the protection of not knowing, a temporary reprieve from a truth that still resonated deep within me. I walked to my apartment balcony and stood at the railing, looking out over Aberdeen Harbor toward the North Sea, where platforms dotted the horizon. Somewhere out there, maybe on a rig that didn't officially exist, my former colleagues continued to experience whatever had happened to them conscious, aware, and probably looking at the same waters I was seeing now, feeling the same deep, resonant hum. My notebook lay open on the table inside, filled with daily entries about my life, and underneath, the terrifying alien scribbles that were starting to creep back in, clearer and clearer. Tomorrow I'd report for another offshore assignment, continue the routine that helped keep me stable, and slowly forget the contents of the letter I just destroyed. The medication would make it harder to question things, and working alone on the rig would stop me from making friends who might mess with my changed memories. But the hum was always there now. A low, persistent thrum in the back of my mind. It was growing stronger, it was calling, and I was slowly, inevitably beginning to remember. Standing there in the salt air, with supply boats moving toward platforms I'd probably work on someday, I knew I would never learn the full truth about what had happened to us. The reality was too much for normal people to handle. I'd been given partial forgetting as a gift, left to live with pieces of a story too scary to fully remember. The harbor lights bounced off the dark water that stretched toward the distance, hiding secrets I'd never be allowed to learn. And perhaps secrets I was already beginning to hear. What's the most chilling mystery you've ever heard about the ocean? Let me know below.